Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently now. In Season 2 of the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm interviewing thought leaders from around the world to pick their brains on what it takes to build a thriving team. This is helping me write my second book, Thriving Teams, which will be out later in the year in 2025. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Unless you've been sitting under a rock, there isn't many days that go by that AI isn't the topic of conversation. Today on the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm joined by Justin Williams, AI expert. Justin brings technology and team leadership experience from working with businesses focused on innovation and challenging the status quo. He currently helps Australian software companies scale through sourcing capital and talent, developing product go-to-market strategies, and securing cornerstone customers. Justin has held consulting, project delivery, and executive roles with HP and SAP, and more recently led a project that secured Black Eye AI's first ever annual customer contract with Walmart US. Justin has expertise in machine learning, generative AI, and large language models. Welcome everyone to the Thriving Leaders podcast. Today, I'm joined by Justin Williams, who I actually reached out to about a month ago to help me out with my book, Thriving Teams. So I wanted to pick his brains about AI. And we caught up and had this really great conversation. And after I finished the conversation, I said, I wish I'd recorded this as a podcast. Would you like to come on my podcast? Because I just think I learned so much. And I think our viewers will also get lots of value. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, Claire, and to revisit that conversation again. I'm really passionate about AI, about machine learning, and it's moving so quickly. It's a really good conversation to have.
Awesome. So tell us a bit about you and your background and what you're doing right now.
Sure. Well, went to university and studied to become an accountant. I did accounting finance and then realized that that wasn't what lit my fire. I then got started in a sales career and spent 15 years in enterprise technology, and from an individual contributor role to a manager role to a general manager role, leadership role. That was fantastic and really exciting. And for the last 10 years, I've decided to spend more time with Australian-based software companies because I see the power of software being able to change people's lives for the better. And in that, I run a business that typically has about 4 to 6 clients. My dance cards are full at the moment, and all of those firms are using AI in some form. So it's fantastic, very energizing for me. And I think Australians are really well positioned to make a great contribution to the way society lives over the next 50 to 100 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about how some of your clients might be using AI out of curiosity?
I sure can. There's a budding new enterprise platform, and it is using large language models to aggregate cloud app updates for users. So, for example, if your business has, let's just say, 25 plus cloud apps that it runs its business on, and you've got so many email updates and so many best practices that you can't keep up with it. This is an AI tool that aggregates all of that and presents a really simplified layer for the employee, really empowering them to adopt best practice super quickly and really efficiently. And for the business, it uses AI to measure the activity of the cloud app subscription against the licensing and raise a flag where it's like very little utilization, and yet there's possibly a significant cost being incurred by the business. So it's a really interesting use of LLMs or generative AI. That's part of the architecture that helps fast track productivity, adoption of best practices, and minimize the administration of these multiple cloud apps. And for the business, keep a track on which one's delivering value, which one's highly utilized, and which one's not. And is there a prospect of some sort of cost saving? That's really exciting. Another that I'm on Muso AI. It's a music generation platform. So it's pure generative AI. And all of, well, I should not say all, but predominantly the first launch of AI is text, right? So you want to search for something, there's text out there on the internet on that. And it's like a supercharged search engine that brings this back for you and says, this is the answer to your question. However, when it comes to sound and sound generation, I think that's a fast follower to text. There are certainly some big players in the US there, but this introduced the whole idea of musicians' rights and how can they use AI to create new sound, not to be the new sound, but to create new sound. And it's a really fascinating application. And it's one that, for me, introduces a whole different model of how do you score sound. And when I say score, I'm not meaning writing a score, but I'm like, for the listener, how do they rate that sound? And there's a bunch of classical rules that are built into this platform, but also there's the user perception of what meets their expectation as being great sound. So that's another interesting application too.
Awesome. So using AI in lots of different ways. So you've used some of the language around generative AI and large language models, and I think people use the word AI interchangeably when they mean a lot of different things. So what does AI mean to you?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fantastic question, Claire. I think AI is a really broad label and it's possibly a little bit misleading because it is such a big catch-all. For me, when I think chronologically about the history of artificial intelligence, machine learning or basic algorithms, what you and I would know as algebra from school, these algorithms are the underpinning of machine learning. And that can be like a self learning algorithm that uses the error to retrain itself in tuning the algorithm. And that is really successful and continues today. And there's a great business, Black AI, that I worked with in 2023, 24, and they use that kind of machine learning extensively. Then you have generative AI. And I think for me, that's the big new wave. That is what people call AI. And that generative AI used by the likes of Canva, Microsoft, OpenAI, etc. Let's not forget Google. But that is a really powerful harnessing of all of the data of the internet and empowering a response. And I think that for people can be quite intimidating, but it can also be really exciting and fun too. And then we have of the third generation of AI, I call it bots, agents, or there's this label used, agentic AI, and that is for solving a particular use case, right? So LLMs that underpin the classical AI, that's for typing in your prompt and getting whatever it is back. But the agentic AI or agents, AI agents, those are specific use cases and ideally targeted at the very, dare I say, boring tasks, and they are built into business platforms that we all use technology to interface with businesses and quite possibly each other. And those agentic AI bots are becoming more prevalent.
Yeah. I think you've raised a really good point about kind of the history and how fast it's moving. And I think that's where it feels a little bit scary for people too. I was actually just saw a little clip on LinkedIn about how, and I can't even remember what the AI tool was, but how it was able to scan every single thing that was on the internet in 180 days. And then months later, it can do it in 18 days. And so like they've just cut their time down so quickly. And I guess that's the exponential growth that we're seeing. But I guess AI is polarizing people a little bit. There's a bit of fear factor that comes with AI because we're not really sure what it's going to look like. And I know that you can predict the future. No, I'm just joking. But what's your personal view of the role of AI at work and where we're headed going forward?
Well, I think it's a really exciting development. for starters, right?
Mm.
It's like something we've
Yeah.
not seen before. Machine learning, some people knew about it, many did not. But this new large language model AI, whether it's DeepSeek, whether it's a Google-based app or something else, it is moving very quickly, and it's not yet performing 100%. Yes, it's increasing in speed. Yes, it's increasing in accuracy. Will it replace humans? It couldn't possibly. However, will it change the way we work? Will it change the way we communicate? I think so. I think, and in quite profound ways we don't even understand yet. For me, I think it is a positive, but with every positive, there is a negative, if I could use that term of an electron. And I think we need to be careful, but to embrace the upside of it, to free ourselves of some of those mundane tasks and be able to spend more time on really purposeful and meaningful conversations and tasks. I'd like to think that life will be just a whole lot better. But there is certainly a dark side, and it's worth being cognizant of that.
Yeah. I'm keen to find out a bit about the pros and cons. So, what would you say are the biggest benefits of using AI?
Well, I think for me, when we say AI and I say LLMs, large language models, I think there
Yeah.
is certainly very fast start to productivity. And so typically mundane tasks that were, I've written that before, I've produced that report before, I've seen something like that before. It enables a user to produce a template. For example, I was recently project manager overseeing the migration of a large language model, a music-based one, and this was to Microsoft Azure, and I wanted to write a case study report and have the engineers collaborate on that report. And I thought, I'm just going to use the LLM for this. Like, why would I bother trying to go and find that file and then change the names and plagiarize it, basically? And it enabled me to send something out to the engineers in less than half an hour. And for me, having edited it, I spent possibly 10 minutes producing the question that saw the response come back. I then spent about 15, 20 minutes QAing that to make sure that I was comfortable that the engineers would be working on a document that was directionally and grammatically correct. I think it will help us spend more time on more meaningful things. And I'm quite excited about what opportunities present by large language models.
Yeah, excellent. So, what do you like? There's obviously quite a lot of risks, and we might not even know what some of them are now, but especially in the context of thriving teams, what do you see are some of the biggest risks of AI?
If I just leave the AI piece for a minute and I think about human behavior and the power of teams, and really the power that I've had the pleasure of being involved with in leading teams, being a participant in a team, is the diversity of perspective, of knowledge, of experience. And yeah, that for me is central to the power of working in a team. And so when I think about that, and could that power be enhanced by a large language model? And I think the answer is yes. So I'm always cup half full. I'm always kind of like, let's see what the possibility is here. Let's think of it as positive and then see how it goes. And I think teams, they can certainly lift their performance with kind of less mundane tasks in prepping for the task. And they can spend more time having quality conversations using some input from a large language model that enriches that conversation, but it does not substitute that conversation. So, much in the same way as I see Microsoft putting Copilot there as an agent on your desktop to assist you, I think AI, large language models, for teams,
Mm.
that they are an asset. They are even possibly a co-participant in a meeting that can help enrich the discussion, help enrich the outcome, and quite possibly get there faster. That remains to be seen. But certainly for some of the admin prep work of it, I've had great results from using large language models to help me and prompt me on what that template could be taking into that meeting for that discussion.
I love the concept of looking at, I'm going to start saying large language models so that I'm not using AI so generally like the general public does.
Yep.
But if we think about LLMs and their use within teams, I like this idea that you spoke about a lot last time about seeing it as an extension of your team. It is another team member
Yep.
or a co-participant in the meeting. What's interesting is, like you said in the example before, from a benefit perspective, that you took if it took half an hour total, a third of that time was really prompting the right question. And I think that's a skill in itself, learning what the right prompts are and what the right questions are.
I
Then there's
agree.
that time reviewing. And I'm keen to explore, what do you think is, like, from a team perspective, what do you think some of the risks are in terms of us asking the right questions, but also having the capability to review what AI gives us back? Because what I find, and I'll just give you an example, I was riffing with AI around my subtitle for my book
Mhm.
a couple of nights ago, and I sort of had a subtitle and I was toying between 2, and then it sort of gave me feedback on one and feedback on the other, and then it gave me all these other subtitles, which I didn't like. I liked my second one. And then I said, "Oh, actually, but I quite like this for this reason." And then it just started agreeing with me.
Yep.
And I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting how agreeable it is."
Mm.
So I know this is a very long-winded question, but I'm really keen about the prompts around the questions and then also our capability to review. Yeah.
So I thought about this in anticipation of today's session, Claire. Obviously, this is a really key one. And when you reflect on your conversations with one person
Mm,
and different worldview, different education, different reading list or not, and so many things. And yet we speak English. And this is the language of Australia. And what you say, they would not be my choice of words, but I understand what you mean. And if I don't understand, I ask a question. Now, put that in a group setting, right? Where we have typically a group meeting of, I would think, 4 or 5 plus people. And then suddenly there needs to be a leader and there needs to be consensus in the team and universal understanding that allows the team to process the problem. And yet, for the large language model, there is one keyboard for input. And who is it that is going to be the person designated that is that prompt that reflects the group understanding? And I think, you know, nuance, semantics, these are things that we have addressed as humans when we communicate. And we've learnt to say, oh, can I just ask, what do you mean when you say that? When you use that word, what does that mean for you? And yet, one person as a team member typing in a prompt for a large language model, how can they be sure that the same word would be meeting the needs of or the definitions of each of their participants in the team? So I think there's a logistics exercise in this, but there's also an acceptance. Hey, before we didn't use this, but now, you know, whoever it is that has the keyboard that is really good at typing it in, let's give it a go. Let's discover what that input could be from this new meeting participant. So I think there are some practical challenges to it, and the nuance with changing the input and seeing the response by reply, that is only just being understood. And when you put it in that team context, gee, I would have written the prompt differently, and quite possibly that would have given a very different response. So, yeah, I think for me, I just don't get too hung up on it, right? Just say, hey, you know, it's something that could be quite interesting, could be quite fun, and it may not be right. And that's okay. So, yeah, an additional team member, I think that's a good way of viewing it.
yeah. But I think you think about the dynamics within a team, and there's already diversity based on cultural background and experience and skills. There's also personality differences, maybe neurodivergent as well into the mix. And it probably happens anyway in terms of who's going to take the action to execute on the task or whatever might happen, their interpretation of language and semantics probably impacts their ability to be able to deliver on that expectation. And I guess that's one of my observations as leaders of teams, that a benefit of large language models is it's forcing us to be a bit more clearer about what our expectations are, because sometimes we can be quite vague. It's also probably helping us normalize feedback to get to the right outcome as well. So, what do you see in terms of clarity of expectations and large language models? What do you see some of the risks are within teams specifically?
I think you hit the nail on the head just there. It's that my way of communicating, let's say, for example, I'm the leader in that context, and the articulation of the task to be addressed or the problem to be solved may not be clear enough, right? I may not provide sufficient detail or accurate information that enables the team to focus on the right priority, use a number of approaches to assess the possible alternatives to that, to understand the implications of it, and then to potentially assign resource, budget, so on and so forth. So there's a large, let's call it, sense of accountability that will be suddenly held up to leaders, because when you said blah, 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 this is what we got back. So the leaders need to really think carefully about how they are framing the objective for that team. And is it fixed, or is it reasonably fluid? Is it iterative, or is it not? So I think for leaders, there will certainly need to be an appreciation that they are clear, and as they can be, accepting that each person communicates differently. So that for me is part one. As for the master editor, let's say the leader of the task, or those who are providing the input for the LLM response, I have editorial rights. Fantastic. I might choose to disregard some of what I've heard from our fearless leader on the priority task or problem to be solved. And so that editorial interpretation, I mean, that has been there for some time. So as you've, for example, held a meeting, can be video conference or it could be in person, and someone follows back, usually by end of day, with a neat summary of the meeting and 3 or 5 bullet points of what they were. Like, hang on, I was in that meeting, you're missing one, you've used different words for that, etc. So understanding the preferences or the motivation of the person who is codifying the conversation, that is another thing again. And I was just on my bike this morning getting my usual ritual of exercise, and one of my guys who's CEO of a big real estate business, he said to me he had to decommission I think it's the default mode of Microsoft recording voice for speech to text in meetings. And he said, we just can't be having this AI listening to every conversation and writing it out. But one of his managers had a very delicate conversation with one of their staff, and this person had their Microsoft speech to text tool activated. All sorts of problems. So I think for me, there's significant risks with AI, but ultimately, if teams understand their role within that new, let's call it, format, and the clarity is given by the leader, or the opportunity to ask questions amongst the team are there, and those questions are understood by the model that is perhaps recording the speech to text, then there is reasonable understanding amongst the team, and hopefully by that large language model participant. As well, the person on the keyboard, that they should think, this is not just for me, I'm in a team setting. And should I perhaps put on Slack or whatever toolset they're using, hey, here's the text input. Can people just come back to me if there's a word missing or whatever? It's not quite practical because that will slow things down, but I think people will understand how they perform in that team setting and how that will influence the results. But net for me, really positive. I mean, you're having this enormously powerful new participant in this meeting. And I think the results not to be taken as read, like they're not 100% right, but to have that content presented in the meeting, it will challenge teams to work differently, but they should improve because the diversity of that team will improve.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I use Zoom and I use Teams, and it's funny looking at the AI summary from the meetings. Sometimes it's like, oh, no, that action wasn't on that person, or no, that's not quite what was said. But then if a human was doing that, maybe there would be the same error rate or maybe less error rate. Who knows? But you raise a really interesting concern that I think a lot of people have is around privacy and where information goes. The transcription example, Microsoft Teams, and I guess the risk that presents, because if it's not perfect or even having things, every single thing that's ever spoken documented, like where is this even going and from a privacy perspective, what are the risks with that too? Do you have a view about, obviously there's open AI versus not. What's your view from a privacy perspective of where all our data is going?
Yeah. Look, I think that's a fundamental question, right? And
Mm,
the privacy laws of Australia, for example, they've been dated or reformed recently. They are considered quite strict, and why not, right? So I think
mm,
in this age of being recorded on camera, on audio, on both, and to know that is me, that's quite possibly my publicly identifiable information or my voice pattern to be recorded. So who has that? Where is it? And what's my ability to restrict the use of that, the sharing of it, or just delete it? And I think those are things that government, for example, they are just getting their heads around. So whilst we have Privacy Act, thank goodness, and it has
mm,
been reformed recently, I think the governments of the world will have a lot of work to do to think about protecting an individual's rights and their privacy. To be able to there's an employee contract, right? So the business, it's incorporated, it has a constitution, you have an employment contract, and ordinarily there is a significant body of rules and regulations, not even the legislation that company complies with. But what we are talking about here are things that these business rules and regulations and even the legislation has not been able to anticipate and will be catching up on. So, for example, the manager-employee meeting, which accidentally was being recorded, and the employees saw it and said, "Hey, is this meeting being recorded? You did not notify me. I'm stopping the meeting." I think they're all really foundational priorities to respect the privacy of an individual, to respect the IP of a company, to
mm.
know how that company manages its data and where it's located, how secure it is, for what use is that to be applied. These are things that previously they were reasonably simplistic, I will say, as far as company data and records and company property and so on. But suddenly it's digitized. Suddenly you may not be aware that you have provided rights and access to your voice and your photographic image.
One of my biggest concerns about large language models or AI is from a teaming perspective. And I think about we've got lots of answers at our fingertips. And I think for teams, that might stop team members collaborating with each other or asking questions of each other, because sometimes when you don't have the answer, it takes vulnerability to say, hey, I don't know the answer.
Mm.
Can you help me out? Whereas now at our fingertips, we can just type something in. And so from a teaming perspective, I see teams collaborating less potentially or having the conversations that they used to have, or even water cooler conversations because you're not in the office and you're working more in hybrid or working from home arrangements. What do you see as the risk for teams based on this?
I'm going to get tired of complimenting your questions, but truly,
Yeah.
the seriously, with the COVID changing the way of working, the average I think is like 3.5 days in the office. It's still not yet
Mm,
back to a 5-day a week. that has impacted collaboration, despite all the digital tools we rely upon to communicate with each other. And now with the advent of LLMs being able to quite comprehensively, if you have a private LLM in your company and it searches all of the data sets that exist within your company, maybe you do not need to have that conversation. And then if you go for the public LLM that hoovers up the planet's data sets available on the web, who's to say I need to speak to anyone because they've not searched your prompt and so on. So I think my concern rests for the interaction and coming back to that unpredictable human nature, right? The broad palette, the broad church, as it's referred to, of humanity and its unpredictable nature, and to satisfy yourself that you become reliant upon your text input and the LLM's response. I think there will be something significantly lost for the individual, right, and their ability to interact. So that is to listen and not just hear, but truly listen to what the person is saying. And that active listening skill, that may well be diminished substantially and or lost. Then again, to think, creatively and, as you said, vulnerably, right, to put yourself out there and say, hey, I don't know, or I have this point of view, but I'd love to hear what you think, or hey, I've put some time into this, I've used an LMM, I got this, here is what it is. I'd really like the team to give me their perspective. That is the richness of that power of teams. And I think your question cuts very close to the bone. Like, you could be at risk of just siloing yourself in your own world, and you become reliant upon the LLM, and there is very little peer review. There is very little interaction. And I think that for the curiosity, right, for the critical thinking of humans, that will be something that challenges us.
And I almost feel like they are the most important skills with AI and large language models that we need to be developing, but they're going to be harder to develop. Like I was helping my 11-year-old. He had like a public speaking exercise that they had to do at school, and he was trying to work out, they had a topic that they had to talk to, and we're coming up with ideas of what he could include in it. And it's just funny because he's only 11, so he's not using AI or anything like that to help. But I'm sure, when everything's done on laptop and he's not writing down his responses, and kids are pretty tech savvy these days, we're not going to be building that muscle as early in life as we used to around problem solving and critical thinking.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before the example of how it only took you 30 minutes to do something that would have taken you a lot longer to do.
Yeah.
And of that time, or maybe even more than a third of that time, was around questioning rework based on your knowledge and expertise of how you could make it better. And when we caught up last time, you said AI can give you the 85%, but then you need the last 15%, which takes in your experience, the critical thinking, and all those experiences. And I guess I keep talking about concerns. I do think AI is great and I use it all the time. But my concern is, like, how do people learn these skills about critical thinking and active listening and problem solving? Because that's what's going to be required of them, because they're going to have the generic or the based on pulling research from the past. And I guess it's a big question what the skills of the future are, but how do people do that last 15%? And I'm thinking about the kind of the newer generation that's going to be going into the workforce.
Yeah. And that last 15%, as we described in my task of half an hour and 2/3 of it was spent QAing, the 2/3 QAing for me is equal to the 15% of what the ordinary task would be in itself. So not to lose sight of the fact that our QA, our critical thinking, that will be disproportionately more time than the large language model uses to burn graphic processor units that chew a shitload of power. And they spit this result back, and it will take time for a human, a person, to read it and satisfy themselves that it, A, aligns to the prompt they put in, but B, will be understood by the individual as well as whomever it's being communicated. And so the kind of the measure of accuracy for me is the LLM will bring back an answer that is 85% or more of what it is you text inputted. And that is improving by the day. But the critical thinking of the individual for perhaps the team, that piece is still going to take time. And would it be faster if I did it myself in the first place? I think unlikely. The power of these LLMs is just massive. But come back to it, the critical thinking piece, and how do you learn those skills? Like, what do leaders, how do they literally educate these high school students, university graduates, postgrads, etc., who are quite, by that time, tech savvy, as you say, and how can they help just frame the learning, right? The lens of learning for the individual, and to make sure that they continue their active listening skills, that they are clear with their articulation as well as their text input. All good. But still harness the power of the diverse human nature, in addition to the large language model, to enrich the experience and the learning. Because for me, winning when I reflect on my career, all of the roles, whether I was an individual contributor, manager, or leader of leaders, it's a team sport, right? Everyone plays a role. Very, very rarely is there just one individual doing one piece of work and takes nobody else. And indeed, if that person is so successful, others say, why did you do it? So I think the collective, and for me, the diversity of human nature is the power, but to help leaders understand the power of that team is going to be augmented by this LLM in whatever capacity, but how to help the individuals realize their potential to be able to think clearly, to be able to communicate clearly, active listening, and to use this incredibly powerful tool set to lift the power and productivity of that conversation. It's a new skill set. And hopefully we don't lose the communication skills that we were taught. And I would like to see very much with my children who are in their 20s, that they can have a device-free communication moment. They're not holding one, and they're able to speak clearly and listen and ask questions. Yeah, I think it's quite a profound change we're stepping into, and it's not yet fully understood.
Yeah. Quite a few different things have come up for me hearing your response, because one of the things I talk about in thriving teams is around how do we collaborate and have healthy, challenging debate. And I think that's really anchored in having really strong generative dialogue, which is about, listening to learn, asking curious questions. And I think curiosity and that questioning of things is really important, but also sharing knowledge. And those three things, I think, make a really rich conversation and dialogue, so you can come up with the best solution. And maybe we'll be doing that with large language models as well as our teams. But they're the skills that I think we really need to listen to. But we've actually, last night, it's the first time we've done this, but we've got a Japanese exchange student who's 11 who has come to stay with us. He came last night, and we were at the dinner table, and we always share, like, what are the three things you're most grateful for? And he only speaks a little bit of English. And so we had Google Translate kind of translating. And when you said before about hopefully we're going to be communicating one-on-one, it did make the conversation very staccato and very waiting for the response. And obviously this is not a typical scenario for a team to be operating in, but I'd hate for us to be communicating through technology with each other, because that will be a real barrier for creativity and solutions as well. Yeah.
I concur. I think there's something to the fluid nature of conversation. And conversation is an art form, right? Like, I reflect on my three children, their COVID experience. One of my children was in university. The other two were in high school. And one just left high school and went on campus, and it was blown up in 2020, and he had to come home. And I think that kind of lockdown really has, particularly for my youngest child, has impacted her ability to feel confident within herself and to have these in-person communication experiences. And if I think about that as like an 18-month, 24-month episode that really substantially changed the way people communicate, what we're looking at here with LLMs will change forever how people communicate. And so I think you're right. The dependency of tools to communicate and in what form, that will without doubt change the way humans behave fundamentally. And I'm mindful of the risks, but I remain focused on the opportunity to learn and to change the way we communicate and we behave, and in the belief that will be a better form. But without question, you're highlighting the communication challenges, and for leaders to be able to focus on the development, right, the holistic development of their team members, independent of whatever tool set that forms part of their day-to-day or team-based work. That is more essential than ever. For the prompt to get the LLM response, but equally for the teams to not become singularly dependent upon that LLM, but to augment the conversation experience and enrich that. Because don't forget, like every text prompt you put into an LLM, that helps train the model, right? So, yeah, I hear you and I agree, but I'm really trying to remain optimistic. I think there is a lot of upside, but we do need to be cognizant of the various roles of the personas within society and business as to what their obligations are now with this new, incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah. And I think I use large language models every day. We use ChatGPT for multiple reasons, and we've created our own bots. I use Perplexity as almost like a research assistant as I'm writing my book, and because it gives us really good references because it's around deep research. So although I sound a little bit negative, I am using it quite heavily within our team. And I think it's made us a lot more productive and efficient. There's just a lot of grey that I just don't know whether we've quite worked out or solved yet. Yeah. You said before, you used the word augmenting the team. What do you mean by that? What does that actually mean?
So I think for me, I think it's very dangerous to talk about replacing teams, right?
Mm,
Other than in an incredibly simplistic context, which those, LLM agents, the agentic AI, is doing. So, for example, your contact center with account password reset or basic inquiries, speech to text and text to speech has been around for quite a long time. And I think that is reasonable and accepted. So the basic administrative tasks, they have been automated for quite some time. And
mm,
and when I talk about AI, LLMs augmenting
mm,
teams, that is not to displace a team member or a team member function. Other than, for example, once upon a time there was a team assistant, right? Like people have personal assistants. There could be a note taker, a designated note taker in the room. And this person may not be a postgraduate qualified, so on and so. That
mm,
administrative role could well be replaced. However, the core functions of the business team will not be replaced by AI, but should be enriched by AI. And that's why I talk about augmentation. So basic admin tasks, low skill tasks that free us up from that work. And without question, like if I reflect on my own career, once upon a time there was the assistant, the secretary, and the executive assistant who the managing director or general manager or whoever had one of those. And over time, I see less of those today. And I don't see those replaced by LLMs, but simple self-service, right? On calendar scheduling, on booking transport, Uber, flights, whatever, very simplistically. But in a team context, I think of LLMs, AI as a new persona that joins that team and is not displacing that team, but is there to enrich the conversation.
Mm, yeah. And I think that's one of the challenges. I guess there's lots of media about AI at the moment. Will they replace jobs and all of that? And I do think that hopefully it will be that we're doing more interesting work and we've got rid of all the admin tasks that chew up time so we can actually do the stuff that's more productive. And then there's even more and more research about 4-day work weeks and how productive 4-day work weeks are, and that you're actually just as productive. So maybe we'll get to work less
Yep.
and live more. And there definitely is a lot of upside. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. So if I could just continue this for a moment, Scott Farquhar was providing an address to the National Press Club in Canberra, and hot on the heels of Atlassian making, I think it was 150 redundancies, quite possibly more. And when I listened to the questioning from journalists of Scott and his response, it's not changed, right? Like, I remember way back when underperformers, the lowest performers in the company, they were made either redundant or they put in a performance improvement plan and they were moved on to something else, and a new bunch of people were hired in, or the teams were resized and those people weren't hired. It's not new for businesses to make themselves more efficient and to reskill the business and quite possibly to make people redundant. So this has gone on for quite literally decades and decades. Right now, because of this phenomenon being AI, as you said, the label is, for me, LLMs, one of the big tech players like Atlassian is being asked, in my view, quite conspiratorially, hey, what's the scoop on this redundancy? Whereas Scott Farquhar's response should have been, well, listen, yes, we've been increasing headcount for whatever period of time. Periodically, however, we have found ourselves with an overhang of resource for a particular function within the business, and they could not be redeployed, and so it is what it is. I think a lot of the attention and the spotlight is on this dark scenario of AI replacing humans wholesale, right? Singularity. That's one of the defined terms. Search that on the internet, and that is about the extinction of the human race. I'm really pleased that Sam Altman and a lot of these AI leaders and our public representatives and legislators, that they are staying in tune with what the constituency needs to be fulfilled and to have a meaningful life. And I think ultimately, and I'll just finish on this point, we should be obligated to spend time thinking about how to create opportunity for those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And we've lived in a charitable democracy for some period of time, but even more now, those who are less educated, they will be superseded through this wave of LLM advancement, where they did the simple tasks back in the day. Once upon a time was the mailroom, right? The mailroom gone, doesn't exist. Once upon a time was front desk. Front desk doesn't exist. So what do these people who have not had the fortunate education that you or I have had, what do they do? And to spare a thought for them, I think that is an underestimated challenge of society.
Yeah. And even I was chatting to my brother about AI. He's a director at a consulting business that he's part owner in. And we're talking about the potential of large language models, but we were talking about AI because we didn't know the lingo. And he was saying that in his view, it might not be his view, he might have read it, that the potential of where we will go with AI will flatten because we're going to hit the environmental challenge that we can't actually produce enough power to keep going. And there's a bit of and that will maybe make things plateau a little bit in terms of that. So what do you see as the environmental impact of AI in general?
Again, another quality question, and this could be a long discussion. Yeah, I think this is one of the unspoken and truly unknown byproducts of this wonderful all-powerful AI. I'll call it that. And my understanding is that the power consumption of the servers required to run the graphics processor units feels like 100 times more power than the computer processor unit, the CPU of the traditional server. And that's not just the power to run these machines, but they also need to be water cooled. And water cooling back in the day was something for an exceptional high load computer like a Cray supercomputer. But now this is for your average GPU server that needs this water cooling. So it's both power consumption, but it's also the water supply, which where does that come from when we're experiencing climate change? And does that draw from mains water supply? And how does that influence availability for local residents that are part of the same water network? What does it do for the water table? Like there's a whole bunch of added, call them complications, that come with this new tech. So NVIDIA, the most valuable company in the world, I think, 4 trillion. Great. What's the environmental impact of that business? And very substantial. So Australia, fortunately, with its renewable power, wind and solar, they're the predominant renewable sources right now. Thumbs up, got plenty of that, plenty of sunshine. Sun Cable was a business that I believe is still running. It's looking to solar power capture out of Northern Territory and export that to Singapore. So how we've got that answer question solved, all good. What about the water? And that is a bigger issue. And with the location of these data centers, how is the water supply predictable given the unpredictable climate of tomorrow, next year, over the next 5 years, given climate change? These are really big issues that I don't even think the legislators are truly understanding, because it goes down through, in Australia, as you would know, federal to state to local government area, for planning requirements, for environmental impacts statements to be levelled, for forecasts of water and availability to be modelled. And I mean, the feasibility study would just be more expensive and more complex. But ultimately, there is a very significant cost beyond the power, but the water, which is becoming a more scarce resource, and it will have interesting implications for Australia.
It's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, my final question, which I always ask our listeners, is if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would it be?
I think I'd offer an anti-tech answer to this, right? To believe in your people, to know that the power is not so much within the leader, but within the team and the team's ability to learn, collaborate, and grow, right? It's through this human behavior that the richness of performance comes. And so I would suggest, yes, leverage AI in whatever form, right? Play with it and experiment with it and understand it. But even double down on what we did yesterday of spend time with the individual, spend time with the team, help the team become more self-aware, and help them learn and grow through communicating with each other, but also leveraging these tools so that we are building a workforce of tomorrow that is compassionate, that is respectful, that is curious, that yearns for knowledge and does not simply think a text response or an LLM response is the answer. Let's keep our critical thinking skills, and with that, our communication skills.
So it is the answer to the future is that it is human driven. It's not tech driven, which I think is refreshing. And I think we just need to double down on the elements that make a team thrive as well.
Absolutely. And I think that team can thrive in a different way, but they can thrive differently, let's say, right? It's very hard to benchmark it over time and say, oh, wow, once upon a time. No, The teams will thrive into the future. They will thrive differently. But as leaders, we still have the obligation to help our individuals and our teams be the best that they can be, right? And so for us to help them by asking them questions, by having them reflect deeply and how they would do things differently if they had that time again, that critical self-assessment, the critical team self-assessment, those are skills that leaders should continue to focus on. And powered by AI, the results.
Yeah, that learning culture. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. I've learned so much as I did last time when we caught up. So thank you so much for your time and coming on the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Yeah, look, Claire Gray, it's just fantastic. I love this conversation and very happy to have it with you. And I look forward to the next. So good on you for helping others be more aware.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Justin, especially diving into the world of AI and large language models. One of my biggest takeaways was the reminder that leaders must frame the lens of learning. That mindset is going to be absolutely essential as we navigate this AI-enabled future. We touched on some powerful themes, like how curiosity and critical thinking are quickly becoming the essential skills of tomorrow. I loved our exploration of human behaviour, the richness that diversity brings to teams, and how learning, growth, and thoughtful use of AI tools will shape how teams thrive going forward, because they will thrive just differently. It got me thinking deeply about what might change and what should. I'd love to hear what stood out for you from today's episode. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, including our Thriving Leaders program, Thriving Women in Leadership and Thriving Teams, as well as executive and team coaching, keynote speaking or facilitation, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful leadership and team development insights and tools, as well as our podcast. You can also grab your copy of my book, Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. It's also available at all good online retailers, on Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive.